Welcome, everyone. This is the session on the gaming industry. The gaming industry is getting bigger and
Sounds
bigger
familiar.
every year. And
Familiar.
there are about 2.6 billion gamers worldwide, and the industry is worth about $100 billion. So I guess there's much to talk about this industry. And now we are joined by major leaders of the gaming industry. So let's give them to introduce themselves.
Hi, everybody. I'm Arthur Chow, co-founder and CEO of Six Waves. So we're a mobile publisher and developer, founded in Hong Kong 9 years ago. And our vision is really want to bring fun moments to people all over the world by bringing the best game experiences to them.
Okay, Jim?
Hi, everybody. My name's Jim. I'm the China General Manager for Supercell. We're a Finnish Helsinki-based company. We have 4 mobile games out in market: Clash of Clans, Clash Royale, Heyday, and also Boom Beach. We have a 5th game that we just soft launched into the Canadian market, where we're beta testing. Our mission is pretty simple: to make the best high-quality games that can be played for decades.
So my name is Yat, and I'm a co-founder of Animoca Brands, which is basically a mobile game company that started in 2011. And we specialize a lot in branded mobile games. So we use famous characters to basically make games like Doraemon or Garfield, and also do a lot in the casual gaming area.
Hi, my name is Jeff. I'm the president and co-founder of iDreamSky. We founded in 2009 in Shenzhen. We are one of the premium publishers for foreign games into China, and we are also one of the largest MAU publisher in China currently.
Thank you. Let's start with Arthur of Six Waves. Okay, you have many experiences in large markets. Can you give us some explanations about the difference between Chinese market and the rest of the world?
Sure. We actually been bringing a lot of games from the west to the east, in particular to Japan. So Japan is actually our largest market right now. So I would say the gamers in Japan is actually very different from the Chinese gamers. I think in general, the Japanese gamers are better in the sense that the behavior in terms of payment is actually much better, right? So the pay rate is much higher. And also, as you can imagine, the ARPU would be also higher in Japan. But having said that, the challenges are, I think the Japanese customers, they have really high expectations. They have very little margin of error that allow the game to actually not go well. So that's why we actually spend a lot of time. So when we were working with a lot of Chinese developers to bring their games to Japan, even their games have done really well in China, we usually spend over 5 to 6 months just to localize and improve the game. And that actually takes a long time to kind of like so-called educate the Chinese developers so that they understand why we have to spend so much time in Japan. But eventually, once we launch the game with really good results, then they really appreciate that. So I think the user behavior and the expectations is actually very different.
Then how can you compare the Asian market to the Western market?
Right, so I think the genre would be very different. So in the West, when you talk about West, usually it's the US market or the North American market. The most popular genre would be the action or sports or maybe casual casino. So we're also talking about this yesterday, right? So a lot of casual casino type games are not allowed in many Asian countries, for example, in China or in Korea. But then those are actually very popular in the US. So I think one major difference is the genre is actually very different. Whereas Asia, you see a lot of RPG role-playing type games and also strategy games that are actually very popular in Asia. So that's actually, I think, it's one of the major differences.
So, sorry, maybe if I just want to add, I think there's also another element of similarities as well because of the fact that diasporas travel around a lot, right? So if you look at the Chinese overseas, they play Asian games. So sometimes you see the Asian style games being very popular in America, and you go, why is that? That's because a small number, relatively speaking, play a lot of games, but they're Chinese or Korean or Japanese. So there's a crossover that happens a fair bit. Yeah.
And there are so many games that are actually very universal. I think Jim will be here to be the first person to talk about. I mean, Supercell's game is basically popular, around the globe, like from very young kids to more mature people.
Yeah, I think what we see actually in terms of the experience or the play kind of habits for our games globally, and globally for Supercell, we have about 100 million players who are playing our games every day. There is differences in, say, the West, in the US, or here in Asia, and even between Asia. So, within Japan, Korea, and also China. I think, one of the examples that we see between China and Japan is, Japanese players like to play more together, whereas Chinese players we see like to have a more direct PvP style kind of experience. So for certain types of our games, for example, for Clash Royale, that started as a 1 versus 1 PvP type game, but then we, about a few months ago, started testing a 2v2 type feature. And what we noticed was that in Japan, we saw play rates and actually playtime actually increase because people wanted to play together against two other opponents. But the Chinese players also enjoyed that as well, but they did that because they wanted to bond together to basically win, to get to an end goal of getting additional cards or a certain reward. Whereas what we see in Japan is they want to play together for more the social aspect. And actually that influences how we do marketing. The creative vision of what kind of marketing ads that we put out, the creative content that we put in our videos or in some of our animations, the voice that comes through.
Well, I think also it's because the Chinese gaming market is very different from the rest of the world. If you look at Chinese player, the mobile phone is their primary gaming device. In fact, most of them, this is their primary device. So unlike in the West or in Japan, where Japan have a very strong console market or a handheld market, in US there's also a very strong console and PC market. In China, even though of course there's still a very strong PC market, but if you look at the current gaming population in China, you will find that users are spending majority, like 90% of their time on their phones as the main gaming device, and because of that, it grooms different player behavior. And also, following Jim's point, Chinese players are extremely competitive among themselves and also among other countries. So one of the things that happened in Clash Royale was, I remember when Clash Royale first came out, there was this big nationalism of Chinese players just wants to conquer all top 200 by Chinese flags, right? Once they get there, they're like, okay, well, what else do we do from here, right? So Chinese players are very, very nationalistic for their own country and their country's pride.
So Jim, your company recently bought a stake in UK-based Rival Kingdoms, right? While it is owned by China's Tencent. So what does that tell us in terms of globalization?
Yeah, so Rival Kingdoms, it's not the company, that's one of the games that Space Ape, which is the company that we invested into. It's a London-based studio. We invested a little bit under 60 million for a majority stake in that company. That happened about a month and a half ago. Around September last year, Tencent invested into us, similar in terms of a majority stake, obviously a different kind of valuation. I think actually those two deals happened for two very different reasons. In short, Tencent has been very well known, I guess, in the gaming industry to be very acquisitive, have real ambitions to become a global player in the gaming industry, and frankly, it's the number one player right now if you measure it by revenue. And a big part of that deal was because they wanted to learn from and have these global aspirations. So, they've invested in a bunch of gaming studios, whether that's mobile or also in PC. Whereas for us, the way we think about it is, we've known some of these smaller studios that we've invested in for a long time, and they're almost kind of friends of ours. For us, Supercell is pretty known in the industry to be a very small company. We're about 220 people globally. We can't do everything. We have 4 or 5 game development teams right now, 4 or 5 other prototyping game development teams. But we can't cover every gaming genre. So what we feel like is a smart way is to begin investing in some of these studios that actually are creating games in verticals that are quite different to us, or that are doing things that we can kind of learn from, that inspire us. So for Space Ape, what they're known for really is live ops, which is kind of an interesting, I guess, trend in the industry that's happening now about how do you lengthen the engagement cycle for your players to keep them playing longer and monetize them better. But two very different reasons why the deals happened.
Okay. And yet, I have a question for you. Okay, you've seen some dedicated fan bases increasing for your company. So how does that help to expand your business and develop new products?
Well, I think this is not just for us, but for any gaming company. Community is important, right? Because the community is the place that creates your defensible environment. Because you have so many games to choose from. You can go from this game to that game to another one, right? So you're trying to create fan experiences, right? Whether it's through a brand or whether it's one for our own. So one of the games that we've had this fan experience is the game called Star Girl, right? It was launched actually in 2012 or 2013. It's still going pretty strong for a game that's that old. But it's not going that strong because it has now the best graphics or it has the best visuals or something. There's games that do much better that way. But it has a loyal fan base that keep playing it all the time because they love the style of the game, they love the engagement of it. And you can see it on the Facebook page how they communicate. So we have that one, it's not exactly live ops, but we do have essentially dedicated people that basically deal with them almost in a customer service kind of way. If they have a customer service request, we answer it immediately. If they want a special costume or design, because it's a fashion game, then we make the fashion and we design it for them and then we publish it out. And they don't get that experience elsewhere. It's really, concierge service, if you will. Right? And that makes them come back to the game every time.
Okay.
For games that, even if they're great games in the beginning, if we don't do that community management, then eventually it dies. Unless the community is big enough by themselves.
Great. Okay. And Jeff, I want to ask you about esports that is getting popularity these days. And so how do you forecast the popularity of esports these days?
Pardon me?
How do you forecast the popularity of esports world?
Well, I think esports is a no-brainer. It's becoming bigger and bigger each day. I think LOL have really shown how big esports can get. And recently with Strike of King by Tencent, we can see mobile is also moving on to esports. But really, if you look at mobile esport, it really started with Clash Royale last year. I think Tencent kind of picked that up from Strike of King. The esport audience base from last year's report is already some of the most viewed sports in the world, probably in the top 5 range already. And I think going forward, I think esport is just going to get bigger. The problem with esport, however, is the sports itself is based on a game. And a game is fundamentally owned by a game company. Unlike sports where no one really owns basketball, no one really owns soccer. And also soccer doesn't really change over time. Like soccer is the same game, my dad's generation to my generation and to my next generation. Where esports is based on the game and the game is based on technology, let's say PC, let's say mobile. Like would LOL be popular for another 20 years when no one is using PC? Can it be transformed into the next technology platform? Now, I think that's the bigger issue with esports is how do it penetrate through generation and how do it penetrate through technology eras? And how do you kind of snowball that audience base? It have a very quick rising speed, but how do you extend that for 20 years?
Okay, then, since all of you are from mobile game companies, do you expect to see a major shift from the traditional game to mobile game industry?
I think we're kind of seeing that already at the moment because you see a bunch of the most popular games, mobile games, are actually originally titles coming from the console, right? So the good thing about that is, they give the impression to the end user that, the quality is already there. For example, like EA has a lot of sports title that are doing very well on the mobile space. And I think, that's more like, it's already happening. But I think what we will see going forward is actually games that are really designed with the mobile device in mind, and that can actually take advantage of the mobile device instead of just porting really successful titles from console or PC to the mobile device.
I also see mobile still as an opening channel for more gamers.
Okay.
I mean, if you think about how many people in the world have come to mobile gaming because of Candy Crush, right? And then as a result, because they're playing Candy Crush, they got invited to the rest of the world of gaming. And if you look at what happened to Sony, when Sony started selling the new version of PlayStation, they had no expectation that it was going to do this well, because everyone was proclaiming the death of console because of mobile. And actually, it did the opposite, because so many people were playing mobile games, and they're like, wow, this is fun. How can I go to Fun 2.0, so to speak? And that was the console game. And so Xbox, and they did well. And then it just created a larger market. So I think mobile is on both sides, responsible for a larger market and also for deeper experiences.
Yeah, I'm also seeing that in China these days is, before mobile, we're looking at roughly around 40 to 50 million gamers. And now if you look at China, how do you really define gamers? Do we still define gamers? Really? Like, I think the whole population is playing games. And we're also seeing that, yes, mobile take a lot of the glories away from PC, console, indie games, Steam. But now we're also seeing these users are moving around. Like they're kind of like, they can't find the content that they want in mobile, or they're like, okay, I want to step up my game a little bit. Some of them went to VR, some of them went to, console. A lot of them went to Steam in China, and that's also why Tencent is looking into that genre right now, and they launched the Wii game, which is kind of like the China Steam. So I think right now what we're seeing is not that traditional gaming is moving to mobile, is that phase have passed already, and now mobile have made the whole gaming industry much bigger, and now we're seeing all this new user cross-pollinating into other sector of the gaming industry.
And I think it goes beyond the gaming industry as a result, right? Because if you look at when we grew up to gaming with the Atari back in the 80s, right? Everyone said it was a toy. Everyone said, okay, we're going to stop playing games, and then Nintendo came out. Okay, that's for my children. But guess what happened? The children started playing when they were adults. And when they had their own children, they started playing as well. And they're all playing our games and that kind of stuff. So gaming actually ended up conquering all. And now with mobile gaming, essentially it's become so mainstream that the concept of gaming, as you say, it's just everywhere, right? It's like total consumption. But it means for the future of product design, I think, everything will have to have elements of game in there. So I think that's where the shift will happen, where you'll find more elements of gamification, if you want to call it, because that's what we expect. Because if it doesn't have it, it's not fun anymore.
Okay, then since Jeff mentioned about VR in the answer, so how do you guys view the VR rise? I remember Pokemon Go was a global hit last year, and that introduced the concept of augmented reality to the gaming industry. So how do you forecast the rise of VR in gaming industry? Is that going to be a huge, or some people have skeptic ideas about that?
Well, last year, me and Yet is on the same stage, asked about VR, and we were skeptical. I would say we weren't skeptical, we were conservative.
We were neutral.
We were neutral.
Yes.
So we're not getting onto that train wagon of like, VR is going to be the next big thing. We think VR is going to slowly rise, and I think we maintain the same statement. We're still neutral. I think one of the biggest challenge that you will find in VR and AR, unlike smartphone is kind of like a step up from feature phone. People are changing their phone every year, every 2 years, right? And when Apple came up with a smartphone, to people, this is a necessity. I have to have a phone anyway. So I'm moving to smartphone. But VR and AR doesn't have that kind of advantage where the phone have, which is you won't say like, well, I'm changing my glasses to an AR glass or VR glass. I still need my glass. Like what it is replacing. So it's a much more a strange or a new experience. And I think VR is going to be in a niche market where people want a very immersive experience. I think AR is going to be I personally have much more belief in AR, but I think it's going to take a lot more time than most people expect again. due to the device size, due to the content. But I think AR could maybe be one of that device that could conquer all screens.
Yeah, I think the challenge for VR is the friction to actually get onto it, right? And when you think about any kind of product design, reducing friction is important. So the reason why mobile games become so easy is because the friction on it is very, very natural, because the device is something that everyone saw the benefit of having, because it made the rest of your life frictionless. You didn't necessarily buy a smartphone to play a better game, but you got a smartphone because it was better for your email, better for your other experiences. And then the frictionless experience came. With VR, it hasn't come there yet. When you buy a Vive, it's a great device, but basically, you have to buy an $800 rig. It takes you, an hour to set up, right? And with Samsung, you can put it on. It's pretty straightforward, but still, it's not there yet, right? And I agree with Jeff that I think AR is much more interesting. I think Pokemon Go has shown us the way of something that could happen really fast, and it was really, really successful. And I think we're going to see a lot more in that space, especially with Apple now coming out with AR Kit.
Do you have something to add, Jim?
Yeah, really quickly. At Supercell, we're not really experimenting with VR games or experiences. I think the challenge is largely probably two. One is the install base right now is still very small, both on mobile and PC, relative to what you need to kind of go past that tipping point for it to be very popular. And that forces publishers to say, hey, well, are the unit economics, does that make sense for me to actually develop a game in that space? And then secondly, it's around budget. Now what you see is probably talk about $500,000 to make a VR game, and now that's probably a year ago. Now it costs almost $1 million or $2 million just to do that for a small indie type game. So really, then when you're looking at that premium PC space, only the really AAA developers have the budget, the conviction, and the long-term kind of mentality to actually go and develop a game. And so I think those two factors are really causing kind of the industry to really kind of consider how it develops.
And Arthur, what's your opinion on that?
Yeah, so I think the expectations for VR has just changed. I think originally people thought that, there are so many mobile devices and you can actually get one of those cardboards on Taobao for $2, right? So huge market, B2C right there, right? But I think that never actually picked up. But I think a lot of companies, at least that I know, has pivoted to more like a B2B. So I think there are still a lot of benefits for VR. For example, in classrooms, they can actually give a very good learning experience for students to explore the world by just putting on no goggles. And also, I think there are also like shopping malls or VR parks that give them like a really, really expensive and top-notch experience. And you can go there. It's kind of like arcades, where you go and pay like $20 for a round, but you're not just going to install that system in your home. And I think so it's not going to be really mass, but I think the people in the industry, they just kind of like pivot and try to see what's the best use of VR.
Okay, then I think the time's up now. So thank you very much for an insightful discussion on the gaming industry. And now we will just let them go.
Thank you.
Perfect.